Hello everyone, this is our first lecture on the electrical measurement and instrumentation. In this lecture, we will discuss the concept of measurement system, the parts of measurement system, the instruments, their types, the units that they use for measurement, and also we will know about some mathematical phenomena that are involved while calculations are done in the electrical systems. So let's move towards the contents of this chapter. First, we will have some introduction to the concept of measurement, the instruments, the types of components that are used inside instrument, that are mainly transducers, actuators, sensors, etc. And after that we will know about some fundamental units and derived units. You people are already familiar with these things, but we will know some basics of these fundamental and derived units. Also we will know about some measurement standards, and how these standards are used for direct comparison and indirect comparison with the instruments that we use in our daily lives, as well as in labs and for some advanced measurement and telemetry, etc. After that we will study the method of measurement, that includes the direct comparison method and the indirect comparison method. And we will also know about the measurement system and its elements. So how measurement is done, what is the point at which we take data, where the data goes and formats, and how it manipulates, etc. And how we finally take the output which is closer to the actual value. So these all things would be dealt in this measurement system. We will also know about the classification of the instrument based on its structure, its function, and the data it uses, etc. So these are also the part of our discussion. After that we will define some of the statistical terms for the data that we take. So these would be the errors as well as the measurement differences, etc. The measurement of errors is also dealt in the form of examples, so we will also study that as well. And after that we will get introduced to this phenomena of loading effect. So this is also part of our discussion. So let's dig in. So what is measurement? Measurement is the act of quantity comparison between some quantity that is given as a unit and the quantity that is to be measured. So we are having a quantity that we want to measure, and we compare it to some standard. So this is our measurement. Instrument, what is instrument? The thing that we are talking about, this comparison, is done by a device, and that device is known as our instrument. So we do these comparison with the help of some quantity and a device. So that device becomes the instrument, that quantity becomes the unit, and the input is then measured accordingly. So that's why this instrument is known as the measurement instrument. Okay. A transducer is a device that converts energy from one form to another form. So often when we do measurement, our quantities are in some format. Let's say temperature is in terms of heat, but we convert it to voltage and measure it using a thermocouple. So transducer converts one energy form to another energy form. So E of heat is converted to energy of electromotive force. So This type of instrument is termed as the transducer. Energy converted that works on the input energy and convert the same energy to another format. So it works on the input energy and it converts whole energy to the output energy. So energy transition occur in transducer. Okay, what is a sensor? A sensor is a device that measures physical input from the environment and converts it into data that can be interpreted by either human or machine. It is same as transducer, unless we know that most of the sensor converts signals to electrical energy format, and it requires some external source of excitation. So transducer will give us the energy as output that we are going to insert into it, whereas the sensor will only sense the data and will show us some reading at its output. So the energy is not transferred in sensor, it just sees something and tells us what it sees. So it is just like eye. The eye sees image, but it does not copy the image into the brain. It just sends signals that something of these colors are present in front of me, so you decide whether it is a human or a color. Okay, so this is the difference between transducer and a sensor. That sensor senses data and gives output with its own energy. Transducer gives the same energy on the output. What is an actuator? Actuator is actually a working component. An actuator, when we give some controlling signal to it, when we give it some command, it works on that command. So actuator is a component of a machine that is responsible for moving and controlling a mechanism or a system. So sometimes when we use a generator, the speed of that generator is measured, and if the speed reduces from a certain level, this is sensed in the form of the output voltage, that the voltage is going down from 230 volts. So this voltage is fed into an actuator that does what? That makes this oil or petrol or anything to go more inside this engine. So this actuator increases the area of this input valve, and thus the generator takes more fuel and this speed becomes higher. So if this speed gets to its normal speed, this signal becomes low, and if the speed is lower, then this signal becomes high and the actuator starts giving more and more input. So actuator is actually a component of a machine that is responsible for controlling this machine as well as for moving some parts. So that is an actuator. Now let's talk about some of the types of sensor. Sensor can be passive sensor or it can be active sensor. You people might be introduced with active filter and passive filter. So this is the opposite case of that thing. A passive filter does not take energy from outside, and it converts all the energy from the input signal and gives it to the output. So that was the definition of that. Now what is a passive sensor? A passive sensor requires external power to operate. So a passive sensor is like a thermistor that does not generate any electrical energy, but by passing an electric current through it, its resistance can be measured. So there is this component, we are measuring its resistance and we are passing some current through it. So we pass the current through it and we calculate the resistance. If the current is 0, we get no resistance. So without the introduction of this I, we cannot measure resistance. So this can be a passive device because it requires some external power, some current and voltage. So we find this current in it and this voltage in it, and then the resistance is calculated. Similarly, a resistance thermometer is used for calculating the temperature. So it is also known as RTD, resistance temperature detector. These are sensors which is used for measuring temperature. And how we measure the temperature? We apply the temperature to this particular device, and then we check what's the resistance of this particular temperature sensor. So the resistance changes, and then we calculate the temperature of the input. So it is just like a closed loop. We give it some voltage, and then it detects some temperature on that voltage. Nowadays RTDs are not taking any external voltage for better measurement, but previously we had this mechanism for it. Now coming towards the passive active sensor. Active sensor, in contrast to this passive sensor, are having its own energy. So external stimulus is not required in this type of sensor. So such type of sensor may be a photodiode or a piezoelectric sensor or thermocouple. In photodiode, let's say this is our diode, and when light is incident on this diode, it gives voltage on its terminal, and then this voltage can be used. So directly we are converting this energy to this format. Okay, this can be drawn by some external source for its biasing, so that's why it becomes a sensor. Okay, this thermocouple is also behaving like the same. We give signal as temperature to it, and this temperature is converted to voltage signals, and those signals are then used for measurement purpose. So as if we check this system is not using any external source. It is just converting the data that we are giving to it, and this temperature is converted to voltage signal. Now this thermocouple couple's data can be amplified for having a bit high resolution. So that amplification makes it a sensor, but it is an active sensor because it is using the signal of its input and converting it to voltage. So it is not using any external source for the excitation, but rather than that we are using some amplification to the signal, not to the device. Okay, so this is it for the passive and active sensor. Now coming towards the measurement units, there are two types of units, the fundamental unit and the derived units. And as we have already known understood that basic fundamental units are three. These units are the mass, time and length. So mass, time and length are the basic fundamental units, and the rest of the fundamental units are known as the auxiliary fundamental units. So these units are depending somehow on these quantities. like current depends upon the electrons and those electrons movement with respect to time.